The morning sun peeked through the dusty windows of Blue Moon Diner, painting golden stripes across the checkered floor. Maya stood by the coffee maker, swaying slightly as she listened to the familiar sounds around her. The soft whirring of the ceiling fans, mixed with the gentle clinks of spoons against coffee cups, created a rhythm she knew by heart. She'd been working at the diner for 3 years now, but every morning felt like a new symphony to her. As she moved between tables with practiced ease, her mind transformed every sound into music. The sizzle of eggs on the grill became gentle cymbals. The chatter of early morning customers turned into a chorus, and even the squeak of her comfortable work shoes added perfect bass notes to her mental orchestra. 2 sunny side-ups and whole wheat toast, called out Uncle Joe from the kitchen. He wasn't really anyone's uncle, but his warm personality and kind eyes had earned him the nickname from both staff and customers alike. To me, his voice was like a deep cello, rich and comforting in the morning symphony. As she carried plates to tables, memories of her old piano teacher drifted through her mind. Music is everywhere, Mrs. Lee used to say, tapping her weathered fingers against the piano lid. You just need to learn how to listen. Back then, young Mai had nodded politely, not quite understanding. Now, at 26, serving coffee and pancakes, she finally got it. Between refilling coffee cups and taking orders, she watched the usual morning crowd drift in. There was the sleepy college student with messy hair and a laptop, the construction workers with their muddy boots and hearty laughs, and the elderly couple who always shared a slice of apple pie for breakfast. Each of them added their own unique notes to her morning melody. The ancient piano sat in the corner of the diner, covered in a thin layer of dust. Sometimes, during quiet moments, Mai would glance at it longingly. Her fingers would twitch, remembering the feel of smooth keys beneath them. She'd had to give up her piano lessons when money got tight after high school, but the music had never really left her. Instead, it had transformed, finding new ways to express itself in the rhythm of her daily life. "Hey, sweetie, could I get some more coffee?" called out a regular customer, pulling Mai from her musical daydream. She grabbed the coffee pot, already moving in time to the clattering dishes and morning conversations. As she poured the steaming coffee, she hummed softly, adding her own voice to the diner's natural music. In her small apartment, she had a worn electronic keyboard she'd found at a thrift store. Every night, after her shift, she would plug in her headphones and let the day's music pour out through her fingers. The morning rush became lively sonatas, quiet afternoons turned into gentle nocturnes, and the evening crowds inspired vibrant jazz pieces. The other waiters sometimes teased her about her constant humming and the way she moved as if dancing to music only she could hear. But Maya didn't mind. The diner was her concert hall, the daily routine her symphony, and every customer part of her audience, even if they didn't know it. As the morning rush began to pick up, Maya tied her apron a little tighter and grabbed her notepad. Another day was beginning, and with it, a new symphony was about to unfold. The bell above the door chimed as more customers walked in, adding their footsteps to the growing melody of the day. For now, she was content being the only one who could hear the music in the mundane, finding beauty in the simple rhythm of life at the Blue Moon Diner. The Tuesday morning crowd at Blue Moon Diner was thinner than usual, probably because of the light drizzle that had been falling since dawn. May didn't mind, though. Slower mornings meant she could spend more time listening to the gentle patter of rain against the windows, another instrument in her daily orchestra. At exactly 8:45 a.m., like clockwork, Mr. Kim walked through the door. His silver hair was slightly damp from the rain, and he carried his usual worn leather briefcase. He'd been coming to the diner every morning for the past 2 years, always sitting at the same corner booth, always ordering the same breakfast. 2 eggs over easy with rye toast, no butter. What made Mr. Kim different from other regulars wasn't his predictable routine. It was the way he noticed things. His eyes, bright and alert despite his age, seemed to catch every detail. Mai had often felt his thoughtful gaze following her as she moved through the diner, especially when she was humming or moving in time to her internal music. "Good morning, Mr. Kim," Me greeted, already pouring his coffee just the way he liked it, black with an extra cup of hot water on the side. "The usual today." He smiled, crow's feet deepening around his eyes. "You know me too well." Then he added, "That was quite a melody you were humming just now. Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 23, wasn't it?" May nearly dropped the coffee pot. She'd been absently humming while working, as usual, but she hadn't expected anyone to recognize the piece. "You know classical music?" Mr. Kim's eyes twinkled. "I should hope so. I spent 40 years producing classical recordings before I retired. The music industry isn't what it used to be, but good music? That never changes." During quiet moments between serving other customers, Mai found herself drawn back to Mr. Kim's table. He told her stories about famous pianists he'd worked with, concerts in grand halls, and the magic that happened in recording studios. His words painted pictures of a world she'd only dreamed about, making her heart ache with longing. "The piano in the corner," he said suddenly, nodding toward the old upright that had been gathering dust. "Does it still work?" Mai shrugged. "I wouldn't know. Nobody's played it since I started working here. Why don't you try it?" The suggestion made her stomach flutter with nervous excitement. "Oh, I couldn't. I mean, I haven't properly practiced in years." "Music isn't about being proper," Mr. Kim said softly. "It's about feeling. And from what I've observed, you feel music in everything you do." The diner was nearly empty now, in the lull between breakfast and lunch. Uncle Joe was in the kitchen, prepping for the lunch rush, and the only other customers were deeply engaged with their newspapers. Mai found herself walking toward the piano, drawn by an invisible force. Her hand reached out, fingers trailing through the dust on the lid. With trembling hands, she lifted it, revealing keys that had yellowed with age but were still intact. She sat down, adjusting the wobbly stool, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes were hesitant, like a child taking their first steps. But soon, the music began to flow. She played a piece she'd composed in her head during countless morning shifts. A melody that captured the sunrise through the diner windows, the first coffee brewing, the sleepy chatter of early customers. The piano was out of tune, some keys sticking more than others, but it didn't matter. The music poured out of her, telling stories of all the moments she'd stored away in her heart. When she finally stopped, the silence felt heavy with possibility. "Well," Mr. Kim said quietly, "it seems the Blue Moon Diner has been hiding quite a treasure." He pulled a small business card from his pocket and placed it on the piano. "When you're ready to share your gift with the world, give me a call. Music like yours deserves to be heard." Mai stared at the card, her heart pounding. For the first time, her private symphony didn't feel like just a dream anymore. It felt like the beginning of something real. After her evening shift at the diner, May climbed the creaky stairs to her fifth-floor apartment. The elevator had been broken for months, but she didn't mind anymore. She turned even these daily climbs into music, each footstep a beat in her endless symphony. Her tiny apartment was barely bigger than some people's living rooms, but she'd made it cozy. String lights hung around the windows, casting a warm glow over her most prized possession. A second-hand electronic keyboard she'd found at a neighborhood yard sale 2 summers ago. The previous owner had been about to throw it away because some keys stuck, but Mai had spent weeks carefully cleaning and fixing each one. She set down her bag and kicked off her shoes, her feet grateful to be free after a long day of running between tables. The business card Mr. Kim had given her sat on her small kitchen counter, where she'd been looking at it every day for the past week. She hadn't called him yet. The idea still made her stomach do backflips. Instead of reaching for the phone, she did what she always did after work. She made herself a cup of green tea, changed into her comfortable pajamas, and sat down at her keyboard. The headphones were old and a bit scratchy, but they did their job. Her neighbors never complained about late-night music because they never heard it. Tonight, she began playing the melody that had been building in her head all day. It started with the morning rain from the diner, soft, gentle notes that pattered like droplets on a window pane. Then came the rhythm of coffee cups clinking against saucers, the swoosh of the swinging kitchen doors, the cheerful chatter of the lunch crowd. She reached for one of her many notebooks. This one had a coffee stain on the cover from 3 months ago. The pages were filled with her handwritten music, each piece titled with the moment that inspired it. Rush Hour Rhapsody, Midnight Customer Blues, First Coffee of the Day. Some people kept diaries of words. Me kept diaries of music. As she played, she thought about the sounds she'd collected over the years. The rumble of subway trains beneath the city streets became deep, rolling bass notes. The sound of pigeons cooing on her windowsill transformed into delicate trills in the higher octaves. Even the temperamental hum of the diner's old refrigerator had found its way into one of her compositions. Her fingers moved across the keys, weaving together the day's experiences. The gentle way Uncle Joe hummed while cooking became a warm melody. The laughter of children at the corner table turned into playful high notes dancing through the piece. Even the moment of silence when Mr. Kim listened to her play the diner's piano found its way into the music, a pause filled with possibility. Time always seemed to disappear when she played. The dishes in her sink waited unwashed, and tomorrow's uniform remained unearned, but Mai couldn't stop. This was her real world, where every ordinary moment became extraordinary through music. A car honked on the street below, and Mai smiled, quickly jotting down the horn's pitch in her notebook. The city never slept, and neither did its music. She'd learned to hear beauty in the most unexpected places. The rhythmic squeaking of the diner's ceiling fan, the different pitches of cooking timers in the kitchen, even the unique ways each regular customer stirred their coffee. Looking around her small apartment, she felt a familiar mix of contentment and longing. The walls were covered with posters of famous concert halls, places she dreamed of visiting since she was a little girl practicing scales on her grandmother's old piano. Back then, everyone had said she had talent, that she could really be somebody in the music world. Life had led her down a different path, but maybe... She glanced at Mr. Kim's card again. The fancy lettering caught the light from her string lights. Golden Age Records, where music tells stories. Her heart began to race just looking at it. Could she really do it? Could she take all these little pieces of everyday music she'd been collecting and share them with the world? A siren wailed in the distance, its pitch rising and falling. Without thinking, Mi's fingers found the notes on her keyboard, adding them to her composition. Every sound had its place in her symphony. Maybe it was time to let others hear it too. The sign in the diner's window had been up for a week now. Local Arts Night. This Friday. All welcome. Uncle Joe had come up with the idea after business had been slower than usual. People love this community stuff, he'd said, taping the handmade poster to the window. Plus, it'll be fun. Mi's stomach had been in knots ever since Mr. Kim suggested she perform. The old piano in the corner seemed to watch her during every shift, waiting. She'd stayed late after work 3 times this week just to practice on it, making sure all the keys still worked, learning which ones stuck and which ones sang true. The big night arrived with unexpected speed. May arrived early to help Uncle Joe rearrange the diner. They pushed tables against the walls to create a small performance space, and someone had strung tiny white lights around the windows. The regular fluorescent lights were dimmed, giving the familiar space a warm, cozy feeling. "You look like you're about to jump out of your skin," Uncle Joe said, watching Maya nervously adjust and readjust the piano bench. She was wearing her nicest dress, a simple blue one she usually saved for special occasions. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Maybe this was a bad idea," she whispered. Through the windows, she could see people already gathering outside. The diner had never hosted anything like this before, and word had spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some of her regular customers had promised to come, and Mr. Kim had mentioned bringing a few friends from his music industry days. Uncle Joe put a gentle hand on her shoulder. Remember what you told me about hearing music in everything. In the coffee cups and the kitchen timer and even my old squeaky shoes. He demonstrated with an exaggerated step that made her smile despite her nerves. Just play that. Play what you hear every day. The diner filled up quickly. The usual booths were packed, and people stood along the walls, talking and laughing. May recognized many faces, the morning regulars, the lunch crowd, even some of the late-night customers she usually served. They all looked different outside their normal routines, dressed up for a night out instead of rushing through their usual meals. Mr. Kim arrived with 3 other people, all carrying themselves with that distinct air of music industry professionals. They sat at a table near the piano, and Mai felt her heart skip several beats. She busied herself helping Uncle Joe serve coffee and snacks, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Finally, it was time. Uncle Joe clinked a spoon against a coffee cup to get everyone's attention. The diner fell quiet, all eyes turning to the piano in the corner. Mi's legs felt like jelly as she walked to the bench. The familiar keys looked foreign under the soft lighting. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. In the silence, she could hear all the usual diner sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft whir of the ceiling fans, the gentle clink of coffee cups. These were her notes, her symphony. This was the music she knew by heart. Her fingers touched the keys, and the first notes filled the air. She began with her morning song, the one that spoke of sunrise through dusty windows and the first coffee of the day. The melody started soft, like early light creeping across the diner floor, then grew stronger as she added the sounds of awakening day. As she played, something magical happened. The nervousness melted away. She forgot about Mr. Kim and his friends, forgot about her shaking hands and racing heart. The music took over, telling the story of countless days in this space, of hundreds of conversations and thousands of footsteps, of laughter and tears, and all the moments in between. She wove together all the pieces she'd been collecting. The rhythm of rain on windows, the symphony of the kitchen during rush hour, the quiet melody of late-night conversations. Her fingers danced across the keys, bringing to life all the music she'd heard in her head for so long. When the last note faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Mai opened her eyes, her heart pounding. Then the diner erupted in applause. She saw Uncle Joe wiping his eyes with his apron, regular customers standing and cheering, and Mr. Kim nodding with a knowing smile. In that moment, sitting at the old piano in the corner of the Blue Moon Diner, May realized something important. She hadn't just been practicing music all these years. She'd been practicing telling stories through melody. And now, finally, she had found her voice. The morning after the Arts Night performance felt different. Sunlight streamed through the diner windows as usual, but everything seemed to sparkle a bit more. Mi's hands still tingled from all the congratulatory handshakes she'd received the night before. Even the regular breakfast crowd looked at her differently now, with knowing smiles and proud nods. "There's our star pianist," Uncle Joe called out as she tied her apron. "Did you see? Someone posted a video of your performance online. It's getting lots of nice comments." Mai felt her cheeks grow warm. She'd been so focused on the actual performance that she hadn't noticed anyone recording. Before she could respond, the bell above the door chimed, and Mr. Kim walked in with 2 people she recognized from the previous night. "Good morning," she said, already reaching for the coffee pot, trying to act normal despite her pounding heart. "That was quite a performance last night," said one of Mr. Kim's friends, a lady with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun. "I haven't heard anything quite like it in years. You have a unique way of capturing everyday life in your music." The other visitor, a man wearing a colorful bowtie, nodded in agreement. "We'd love to talk about recording some of your compositions, perhaps during your break." May nearly dropped the coffee pot. Recording? Her compositions? The idea seemed both thrilling and terrifying. She glanced at Uncle Joe, who gave her an encouraging nod. During her break, they sat in a quiet corner of the diner. The lady, who introduced herself as the owner of a small recording studio, explained the proposal. They wanted to record an album of May's diner-inspired compositions. Music that tells stories of everyday life. That's what people connect with, she explained. And you have a gift for finding beauty in the ordinary. But then came the challenging part. To make the album properly, Mai would need to spend significant time in the recording studio. That meant cutting back her hours at the diner. The thought of leaving her comfortable routine, even partially, made her stomach churn. Take some time to think about it, Mr. Kim said gently, noticing her worried expression. This is a big decision. Throughout her shift, Mi's mind raced. She watched her regular customers, the old couple sharing their morning toast, the busy office workers grabbing quick lunches, the students with their laptops spread across tables. These people and their daily routines had inspired her music. Could she really step away from this world that had given her so much inspiration? During the afternoon lull, she sat at the old piano again, running her fingers lightly over the keys. The familiar sounds of the diner surrounded her. The coffee machine's gurgle, the clatter of plates, the gentle conversations. These were the notes of her life's symphony. One of her regular customers, a grandmother who came in every afternoon for tea, approached the piano. You know, she said softly, I've been coming here for 5 years, and I always wondered why this place felt so special. Last night, when you played, I finally understood. You've been turning all our ordinary moments into something magical. The lady's words struck a chord in Mi's heart. She thought about all the music she'd written in her tiny apartment, all the melodies she'd heard in the simplest sounds. Maybe it was time to share these songs with more people than just the diner crowd. That evening, as she wiped down tables, Uncle Joe came over with his usual wise expression. You're worried about leaving us, aren't you? He asked, reading her face like an open book. May nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Listen, he said, pulling up a chair. This diner's been here for 30 years, and it'll be here 30 more. Your music is a gift, and gifts are meant to be shared. Besides, he added with a wink, we'll need a house pianist for our future arts nights, won't we? Looking around the diner, at the worn tiles she knew by heart, the familiar faces of her coworkers, the piano in the corner that had changed everything, Mai felt a wave of gratitude. This place hadn't just been a job. It had been her music school, teaching her to hear melody in the mundane and magic in the everyday. The decision crystallized in her mind, clear as the ring of a bell. She could take the step forward while keeping one foot in the world that had inspired her. After all, every great symphony needs both movement and repetition, change and consistency, new songs and familiar refrains. The recording studio was nothing like Mai had imagined. Instead of the glossy, high-tech space she'd seen in movies, it was a cozy room with wood-paneled walls and warm lighting. But the grand piano in the center, that was everything she'd dreamed of and more. Its polished surface gleamed under the lights, keys pristine and perfect. Take your time getting comfortable with it, the sound engineer said kindly, adjusting some dials on his equipment. A piano's like a person. You need to get to know each other first. May now worked morning shifts at the diner 3 days a week, spending her afternoons and other days at the studio. The change hadn't been easy. Some days, she felt like she was living in 2 different worlds, the familiar comfort of the diner and the exciting but scary world of professional music. The first few recording sessions were rough. Her fingers, so confident on the old diner piano, felt clumsy on the grand piano's perfect keys. The silence of the studio was different from the lively background noise she was used to. More than once, she found herself missing the clink of coffee cups and the sizzle of the grill, the very sounds that had inspired her music. It's not working, she said one frustrating afternoon after the 10th take of her morning rush hour piece. It sounds empty somehow. Mr. Kim, who had been listening from the control room, came in and sat beside her on the piano bench. "Tell me what you're thinking about when you play." "I'm thinking about getting it right," she admitted. "About playing each note perfectly." He shook his head gently. "That's your problem. You're thinking about the notes instead of the story. When you played at the diner, what were you thinking about?" May closed her eyes, remembering. The sunrise through the windows. Uncle Joe humming in the kitchen. The way the early morning regulars shuffle in, still half asleep. The smell of fresh coffee and toast. "Play that," he said simply. "Play those memories." So she did. This time, instead of focusing on perfect technique, she let her mind wander back to the diner. Her fingers found the rhythm of footsteps on tile floors, the melody of morning conversations, the harmony of a dozen small moments weaving together. When she finished, she opened her eyes to find the sound engineer grinning behind his glass window. "That's the one," he said through the intercom. "That's exactly what we've been looking for." Days turned into weeks. Mai learned to bring the diner's spirit into the studio with her. She recorded pieces inspired by the lunch rush and quiet afternoons, by rainy days when customers shook water from their umbrellas, by the late-night conversations of tired travelers. Between sessions, she still worked her diner shifts, finding new inspiration in familiar routines. Her regular customers loved hearing about the recording process, and she loved testing new pieces on the old upright piano during quiet moments. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Some days, the music wouldn't come. Other days, doubt crept in, whispering that she was foolish to think she could do this. The bills piled up. Studio time wasn't cheap, even with Mr. Kim's friends giving her a good rate. She started taking extra shifts at the diner to make ends meet. One particularly tough day, after a frustrating recording session, she sat at her usual booth during her break, stirring her coffee absently. Uncle Joe slid into the seat across from her. "Rough day?" he asked, pushing a slice of his famous apple pie toward her. Mai nodded, too tired to speak. The pie's familiar cinnamon scent brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "You know what I think?" Uncle Joe said, watching her with fatherly concern. "I think sometimes we get so caught up in chasing our dreams that we forget why we started dreaming in the first place." He gestured around the diner. "Look at this place. It's not fancy. The coffee's not gourmet. But people keep coming back. Know why? Because it's real. It's honest. Just like your music." His words struck home. Mai realized she'd been so focused on making everything perfect that she'd started losing the very thing that made her music special. Its honesty. The diner wasn't perfect, and neither was life. The beauty was in the imperfections, the small moments, the real stories. That evening, she went back to the studio with renewed purpose. When she sat at the grand piano this time, she didn't try to be perfect. Instead, she played the truth. Every wobbly note from the diner's old piano, every missed beat in life's rhythm, every moment of doubt and joy and determination that had brought her here. And somehow, in embracing the imperfection, she found her way back to the heart of her music. The small record shop downtown had never seen such a crowd. People lined up outside, peering through the windows at the display featuring May's album, Diner Symphony, music of everyday life. The cover showed the Blue Moon Diner at sunrise, golden light streaming through its windows. Inside, May could hardly believe this was real. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up a copy of her own album. 6 months of early mornings, late nights, doubt, determination, and countless cups of coffee had led to this moment. The collection of songs told the story of life at the diner, from sleepy sunrises to bustling lunch hours to quiet midnight moments. Look who made it to her own album release. Uncle Joe's voice boomed as he walked in, carrying a huge tray of fresh-baked cookies from the diner. Several regular customers followed him, all wearing bright smiles. They'd been there from the beginning, listening to her practice on the old upright piano, offering encouragement on tough days, celebrating every small victory along the way. The owner of the record shop, an elderly gentleman with round glasses, turned on the store's sound system. The first notes of May's Morning Rush filled the air, the piece that captured sunrise at the diner, with its gentle beginning that built into the lively rhythm of breakfast time. "That's exactly how it sounds," one of her regular customers whispered, eyes closed. "Like you somehow caught all those little moments we never stopped to notice." People browsed through the albums, some holding them carefully like precious things. May signed copies, her handwriting wobbly at first but growing steadier. She wrote small notes with each signature, thank you messages to the community that had supported her dream. Mr. Kim stood by the window, watching it all with quiet satisfaction. "You know," he said when she had a moment free, "this isn't the kind of success most people in the music industry dream about. It's better. It's real." He was right. Her album wasn't topping any mainstream charts or making her a fortune. Instead, it was doing something more meaningful. It was touching people's lives, helping them hear the beauty in their own daily routines. A local coffee shop had already asked to play her album as their morning background music. A small independent film director had reached out about using some pieces in their upcoming movie. A nearby piano teacher was using her songs to show students how music could be found in everyday sounds. Later that evening, back at the diner, Mai sat at her familiar spot behind the counter. She still worked here 3 days a week, not because she had to anymore, but because she wanted to. The diner wasn't just where her music had begun, it was where it continued to grow. The old piano in the corner had been fixed up properly now, and she often played for customers during quiet hours. Sometimes, people requested songs from her album. Other times, she played new pieces inspired by new moments, new stories she observed from behind the counter. "Play the Sunset Song," called out a young customer, probably no more than 12, sitting with her mother. Mai smiled and walked to the piano. This piece wasn't on her album. It was something new she'd been working on, inspired by the way evening light painted the diner in shades of gold and pink. As she played, she looked around at the familiar faces, the worn tiles, the coffee-stained menus, and the small stage area they'd kept from that first arts night. Everything was exactly the same as before, yet somehow completely different. A new waitress had started last week, and Mai had noticed her humming while she worked, moving with a rhythm all her own. Maybe she too heard music in the everyday moments. Maybe she had dreams of her own. The Sunset Song ended, its final notes melting into the gentle hum of conversation and clinking plates. Someone started clapping, and others joined in, but Mai barely noticed. She was already listening for tomorrow's song in the familiar symphony of the diner, in the whoosh of the coffee machine, the ding of the kitchen bell, the cheerful greetings of customers becoming friends. Her journey hadn't ended with the album. Instead, it had opened her ears and heart to even more music in the world around her. Every day brought new songs, new stories, new moments to capture in melody. And here, in this simple diner where it all began, she had found something better than fame or fortune. She had found her own kind of harmony, a perfect blend of dreams and reality, music and life. As she stood up from the piano, the evening sun streaming through the windows caught the album display on the counter. Diner Symphony, it said, but Mai knew it was more than that. It was a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most ordinary places, and that dreams don't always look the way we expect them to. Sometimes they look even better.